The wind on the barren moon rose like a restless tide, sweeping dust across the low ridges that ringed the makeshift human camp. The sky held a dim copper haze that never fully brightened, even during the cycle that passed for day. The place had no warmth of its own, no color, no welcome. Yet a lone human sat there, tending a small fire that flickered stubbornly against the cold. His name was Rowland, a field technician assigned to survey the mineral layers beneath the outpost. He had not expected visitors, much less any living beings beyond the crew, stationed several kilometers away. The moon had been labeled vacant, safe, and uninhabited. That assumption was about to be rewritten. Rowland crouched close to the fire. He kept it controlled, feeding it fragments of resin from the supply kit. The flame cast a bright circle around him. Beyond that circle, the world sank into shadow. He worked in silence until he heard the crunch of gravel on the far slope. His head rose sharply. His first thought was that someone from the survey team had wandered out. That hope died when he saw two silhouettes, both lean, both unfamiliar, descending toward him. Their stride was cautious. Their outlines shifted in the dim haze, marked by faint metallic glimmers along their limbs. They moved without the weight of suits or breathers. That alone told him they were not human. Rowland rose slowly. He did not reach for the emergency beacon attached to his gear. He had been trained to avoid provoking unknown species. Besides, something in the movement of the figures seemed weary rather than hostile. The first figure stepped into the edge of the firelight. She was slender, tall, with pale silver skin that carried a soft sheen. Her eyes were dark violet. A mantle of smooth plates lined the sides of her arms. She wore no armor, only a loose array of woven bands that wrapped her torso. The second figure, nearly her height, followed and halted beside her. She had the same silver coloring and violet eyes, though her features were sharper and more angular. Rowland kept his voice steady. He greeted them and gestured toward the fire. The two exchanged a glance. The first one spoke. Her voice carried the soft rhythm of unpracticed human speech. She introduced herself as Lyra. The second introduced herself as Kiva. They said they were sisters, survivors of a long scattered tribe that roamed the uncharted moons near the outer systems. Rowland listened as they explained that their group had been driven apart during a storm of charged particles that had disrupted their vessels. Lyra and Kiva had been forced to land on the barren moon. Their craft was nearby, but its energy reserves were nearly depleted. The moon's cold drained them faster than they could adapt. They had seen Rowland's fire from afar and had chosen to approach, uncertain whether the flame meant safety or danger. Rowland offered them a place beside the fire. Lyra crouched down first, her plates glimmering softly. Kiva followed, but kept a watchful stance. She studied Rowland with sharp interest, but also with something like caution. The fire cast shifting reflections on their silver skin. They seemed not only warmed by the flame, but also transfixed by it. Rowland explained that humans had used fire since ancient times, long before they had crossed the stars. Lyra leaned closer, her eyes bright as she absorbed every flicker. She said her people had no natural fire on their homeworld. They relied on chemical heat and radiant engines, not open flame. Seeing fire up close was rare for them. Kiva nodded, but kept her gaze on the shadows beyond the firelight, as if expecting danger at any moment. The three sat together for several minutes. Rowland felt no fear. Their presence carried no sense of threat. Instead, he sensed exhaustion. The sisters had wandered far across the barren terrain. They had no shelter and no heat. Their craft would not sustain them for long. He asked why they had not returned to the main cluster of their tribe. Lyra said their long-distance communication had gone silent. They carried only short-range beacons, none of which had detected any signals from kin. Kiva added that they had been traveling for several days, relying on low light vision to avoid hazards. They had found no life, no structure, nothing except Rowland's fire. Rowland knew the outpost command would object to unauthorized contact. They preferred isolation while surveying new moons. Yet leaving these two in the cold was unthinkable. He offered them shelter at the fire until sunrise. He could contact his team for assistance if needed. Lyra accepted gratefully. Kiva hesitated, but eventually agreed. Rowland placed more resin into the flame. It brightened, pushing back the cold. The sisters moved closer. Lyra extended her hands toward the fire, though she kept them several centimeters away. She said the warmth was unlike anything she had felt before. Kiva settled across from her, keeping the fire between herself and the darkness. Rowland asked whether the cold was painful for them. Lyra said it was not painful, but draining. Their bodies absorbed energy from sources around them, including light and vibration. This moon offered neither. Hours passed. They spoke of the stars, of exploration, of how humans measured time and how Lyra's people measured memory. Lyra's voice carried gentle curiosity. Kiva's was stronger, steady with caution, but also with growing interest. Rowland told them stories of early human explorers who had crossed deserts with only a small fire to mark their camp at night. He explained how fire had guided them, comforted them, kept them alive in unknown lands. Lyra listened with fascination. Kiva listened with subtle pride, as if she found the idea admirable. At one point the wind rose. Dust swirled around the ridge. Kiva stood quickly, scanning the horizon. Rowland asked what troubled her. Kiva said she sensed a vibration carried by the wind. It was faint yet distinct, like the presence of something heavy moving far away. Lyra looked uneasy and took a step closer to Rowland. Rowland checked his scanner. It detected no life forms, but did register small fluctuations in the magnetic field. He suspected shifting metal deposits beneath the surface. Kiva did not seem convinced. She watched the horizon with unwavering focus until the wind eased. When nothing appeared, she sat down again, though her posture remained tense. As the cycle approached dawn, the fire dimmed. Rowland prepared to add the last piece of resin. Lyra touched his arm lightly and asked whether fire could be revived without fuel. He explained that it needed material to burn. She nodded thoughtfully. Kiva asked how long humans had depended on such primitive methods. Rowland answered that even with advanced tech, fire carried symbolic value and still had practical uses in survival. Kiva gave a small approving nod. Rowland knew the resin would not last through the next cycle. He looked toward the ridge and considered retrieving more from a storage cache near the outpost. The journey would take nearly an hour. The sisters insisted he not go alone. Lyra said the land held echoes that were unfamiliar. Kiva agreed firmly. Rowland said he appreciated their concern, but the cold would slow them. Lyra replied that the fire had restored part of their energy. They could travel. He accepted their company. Together they climbed the slope. The sky brightened to its usual copper tone. The moon's surface stretched far and empty. Lyra walked at Rowland's side, her gaze scanning every ridge with gentle alertness. Kiva ranged slightly ahead, spear-like focus fixed on the path. Rowland noticed that their steps left faint glowing traces on the ground. Lyra said it was a byproduct of their energy regulation. Kiva added that it faded quickly and was harmless. Halfway to the storage cache, they heard a distant crash. The ground trembled. Kiva stepped in front of Rowland instinctively. Lyra moved beside him. Rowland activated his scanner. A large object had impacted several hundred meters away. Kiva said the vibration matched what she had sensed earlier. Lyra whispered that something might have followed them through the particle storm. Rowland suggested a cautious approach. Kiva agreed, but kept her stance taut. When they reached the impact site, they saw a broken pod half buried in the dust. The metal hull was torn open. Inside lay fragments of crystalline spheres, each one cracked. Lyra inhaled sharply. She said the spheres were data vessels used by her people. The pod must have belonged to another group from their tribe. Kiva knelt and examined the shards. She said the pod had been damaged before landing. Something had struck it. Rowland studied the marks on the hull. They were long gouges, too uneven to be mechanical. They looked like claws. Lyra stepped back, her expression tense. Kiva stood and positioned herself between the others and the pod. Rowland asked what could have done this. Kiva said a predator species from the outskirts might have followed the tribe's vessels. They were drawn to energy signatures and would attack anything that emitted heat or vibration. Rowland realized the fire had been a beacon. Lyra explained that such predators avoided light but sought warmth. The sisters had not sensed them earlier because the cold had masked their own presence. Rowland felt a chill. He asked whether the creature was still close. Kiva said yes. She felt the tremor again. The ground shook. A dark shape rose behind the broken pod. It was massive, with limbs like twisted branches and a segmented hide that reflected no light. It moved with sudden speed. Kiva shoved Rowland aside as the creature lunged. Lyra called out to Kiva, but Kiva stood firm. Rowland grabbed a flare launcher. He fired it directly above the creature. The sudden burst of light made the predator recoil. Lyra seized a shard of the pod and hurled it with surprising force. It struck the creature's hide and released a spark. Kiva charged forward and struck the CR.